Welcome to the Berean Voice. I'm Randy Seaver. Today I'd like to talk to you about the debate between James White and Leighton Flowers on John chapter 6. It is my opinion that the debate topic should have been, given what the debate turned out to be, whether or not God's call is effectual or not, and whether sinners are able to come to Christ apart from that effectual call. That would have been a much better debate topic, in my opinion, but it turned out to be a relatively decent debate, and I think it was very clear that the truth was on the side of James White, and I'm sure those of you who may be provisionist would disagree with that, but he was the one who disciplined himself and stuck to the subject, and Leighton Flowers wanted to discuss infant damnation and all the rest of it. And in my opinion, this is what needs to be discussed. There needs to be a debate on Romans chapter 5, verses 12 through 19. That's where the real issue is. If we have not fallen in Adam, and if we come into the world unscathed, until we, by our libertarian free will, choose to sin, then our argument is out the window. But if in fact we have been, had Adam's sin imputed to us and his nature imparted to us, so that we are now under the dominion of sin until God, by his free and sovereign grace, delivers us from our sin, then it's another issue altogether. And so it seems to me this is where the debate ought to center at this point. As long as people have the idea that God, for no reason whatsoever, has just determined that he's going to damn people who are not themselves sinful, apart from the fact that they, by their libertarian free will, choose to sin. And by the way, if you have libertarian free will, there is no certainty that you will choose to sin. If Leighton is right, then Pelagius was right. But Pelagius was not right. Anyway, I want you to listen to this, perhaps the most egregious statement that was made in the entire debate. Dr. White had made the comment that the provisionists don't like the idea of God's decree, and Leighton is responding to that. Listen to what he said.
I want to address the accusation that we don't believe in a decree. We believe God decrees, but God decrees good things, not evil, on provisionism. And so we love God's decree. We talk about God's decree all the time, but we don't believe in the decree of rape and murder and molestations, of every single evil, heinous thing that happens in the world. That's what we detest. We detest people blaming God for heinous evil by saying that God brought it about by sovereign decree. That's what we despise. We don't despise the decrees of God.
Okay, that's an interesting statement. One of the things that I'd like to respond to first of all in this statement is that Leighton has said that, or at least implied, that we blame God for the wickedness that occurs in the world because God has determined to permit it in his world. This is not what we believe at all, and we don't blame God for what God has decreed. God does not allure people to sin. God is not the author of sin. God does not violate human freedom. He uses second causes and establishes his purpose. It's important for us to understand that, indeed, Leighton does like God's decree as long as God's decree pleases Leighton. That seems to be what he was saying in that statement. We don't believe God decrees bad things. We simply believe God decrees good things. He only brings about those things that are warm and fuzzy. He doesn't bring about cold prickles. Now, it seems to me that Paul in Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 11 lays that whole idea to rest when he says that God is the one. Notice he's not simply saying this is what God does, but he is describing God as the one who is working. The word working there means to effectively accomplish. He is effectively accomplishing all according to the counsel or the decree of his will. God is accomplishing all according to the counsel of his will. In other words, it isn't simply those things that we would regard as good, but those things that we would regard as evil that God has said he brings about. I'm thinking about Job and his situation because you remember Lucifer had come into the presence of God and said to him, God said to him, where have you been? He says, I've been walking up and down the earth. And Yahweh says to him, have you considered my servant Job? That there is none like him in the earth, an upright man, one that fears God and shuns evil. And so Satan says, okay, let me at him. And so God grants permission to Satan to afflict Job. And so we see in the account in chapter 1 of Job that Job's children were feasting in one of their homes, and the house was destroyed and they were killed, and the herds and so forth were marauded, and it was just a terrible, terrible day. Ultimately, Job lost everything in one fell swoop. And at the end of the day, Job says, the Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And so Satan comes back into Yahweh's presence, and he says to him, you've built a hedge around Job. If you just let me at him and let me afflict him physically, then he'll curse you to your face. And so he has permission to go and afflict Job with boils from head to foot. And Job is scraping his boils with a potsherd and suffering greatly. And still, he justifies God. He declares God righteous in what he has done and blesses God for his providential care. And his wife says to him, are you still going to remain in your integrity? Just curse God and die. And here's his answer to her. You're speaking like one of the foolish women. Shall we receive good? Notice where it comes from the hand of the Lord, and shall we not receive evil or adversity from the hand of the Lord? You see, both of these come from God's hands. I'm also thinking about Habakkuk and Habakkuk's perplexity when he saw what was happening in the nation of which he was a part. And the whole first chapter is about Habakkuk's perplexity with Yahweh's dealings. The first thing he starts talking about the fact that he continues to pray and to pray and to pray that God will do something about the injustice that is happening in the land. And yet God doesn't seem to hear. He seems to have turned a deaf ear to his prophet. Why won't you do something? How often have some of us prayed that God would send a great revival and renew his work? And yet, rather than things getting better, they seem to be getting worse. That's perplexing. Why doesn't God do something? Why doesn't he revive his work? And then Yahweh says, I'm going to do a work in your day that you're not going to believe even when you see it happening. I'm going to raise up, notice who's doing it. He doesn't say Satan is going to raise up the Chaldeans. He says, I'm going to raise them up. I'm the one who have set them in their place. I'm the one who has appointed them for this task. I'm going to raise them up. And the chastisement that is going to take place is going to be awesome. And Habakkuk says, wait a second. You're the one who has set them in their place. You have determined that they, in their wickedness, are going to accomplish this task. And yet they are more wicked than the people you are chastising. You're of purer eyes than to behold iniquity. You can't look on sin with favor. How can you use these wicked people to accomplish your purpose? And yet, who was it that raised up the Chaldeans? It wasn't Satan that raised them up. It was God himself who raised them up and accomplished his purpose through them. Ultimately, as we move on through the book, Habakkuk begins to understand what God is doing. And his prayer is, "O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. I know that you're not going to destroy us because you are our God and we are your people. You love us and you have only our best interest in view. And so we shall not die." But it's going to be extremely difficult when God brings about this work that he has determined to use the Chaldeans to accomplish. Now, were these good people? And was what they were doing really good stuff? And the answer is no, it was horrible stuff. They were wicked people. And yet God is the one who has determined to set them in their place and to raise them up for his good purpose. Does God get the blame for their wickedness? And the answer is, of course not. The Lord, Yahweh, is in his holy temple, the text tells us. And our response to that, Mr. Flowers, our response to that is, let all the earth keep silence. Let all the earth hush before him. Don't accuse God of evil, because God is the one who brings about evil for a good purpose. Does God cause people to do the wicked things they do? And the answer is no. Does God intend to permit them to do the wicked things they do in order to bring about a good purpose? And the answer is absolutely yes. And ultimately, Habakkuk comes to the place that he says, given what God is intending to do, if there's no herd in the stall, if there's no crop in the field, I'm still going to rejoice in the God of my salvation, because God has gone forth for the salvation of his people. Listen to that carefully. God has gone forth for the salvation of his people. What seems to be wickedness, and is wickedness, on the part of the Chaldeans is intended by God for the salvation and the sanctification of his people. I hope this has been helpful to you. Don't think God has only ordained the good things that happen. No, God has ordained everything that happens. That doesn't mean that God actively brings everything to pass by causing it as the proximate cause of it, but it means that God has determined to permit evil in his world because he has a good purpose for it. The hymn writer said, God moves in a mysterious way his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm, deep in unfathomable minds of never-failing skill. He treasures up his bright designs and works his sovereign will. His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. What a beautiful hymn. I hope you'll let those words sink down into your hearts and rejoice in the fact that whatever may occur in God's world has been determined by God for the good of his people and for his own everlasting glory. Do we blame God for the wickedness that brings that good about? And the answer is absolutely not. Listen to what Thomas Watson, one of the Puritans, wrote. God has a hand in the action where sin is, but no hand in the sin of the action. Let me read that for you again. Let it sink in. God has a hand in the action where sin is, but no hand in the sin of the action. In other words, God cannot be blamed because he has determined to permit wickedness to occur in his world because he has a good purpose for permitting it, and will ultimately bring everlasting good, spiritual good to his people and glory to himself. Well, until next time, may God richly bless you.